Hello and welcome. I'm Maggie, aka the Naughty Magpie, and today I'm going to combine two of my greatest loves, crochet and horror movies. So if you love warm fuzzy feelings and stream-worthy slashers, then grab your hooks and needles and also your crochet supplies and get comfy, because today we're watching Travis Stevens' Girl on the Third Floor. If you're interested in more details about today's crochet project, be sure to check out the link in the description where you'll find the project page on Ravelry. That's where you can find the pattern, my notes, and more info about the process, as well as links to my Ravelry page where I share my own original patterns. I'm going to show occasional clips from the film, but if you're just listening to this as background noise, that'll work just as well. And with that out of the way, let's get into the movie. If you're worried about spoilers, it's okay. I'm just going to give my impressions to start with, and then I'll give my sort of summary/analysis thing. I don't really like reviews or number scores or whatever, and as far as horror goes, I think the reviews for this movie are kind of a case in point as to why that system doesn't really work for horror movies as a genre. On Rotten Tomatoes, Girl on the Third Floor has an 84%, which equates to 4 stars. On IMDb, it has a rating of 2 stars. Horror is subjective, and there are so many genres within horror and so many things that a person could be looking for that trying to please everyone just isn't going to happen. That being said, I'm also going to place trigger warnings here because even horror fans might have things they prefer not to see. This film contains sexual violence, animal cruelty, and obviously lots of bodily fluids, including but certainly not limited to blood. Here's what I think Girl on the Third Floor does right. It's a haunted house film, but it's got a twist in the story of the house that goes beyond your run-of-the-mill murder. Haunted house films in general usually serve their horror by painting a portrait of normal life and then subverting it. Homes are where we feel safe, so haunted homes make us feel afraid. Family are the people who care for us, so family members become the people threatening us. This is why The Shining, despite taking place in a hotel, is still a haunted house movie. The alternative to this is when you get a group of kids going into a haunted house on a dare or on Halloween or whatever, and the house's history makes itself known. Even this is a subversion of daily life, where the past becomes the present, and where inanimate objects become significantly more animated. Girl on the Third Floor does us all a favor by skipping the domestic bliss setup and getting right into a more realistic depiction of life. Main characters Dawn and Liz are expecting a baby, so Dawn goes off to renovate a fixer-upper house with their dog, Cooper, while Liz stays back to work. And it's Dawn's own weaknesses as a person that cause him to start falling prey to the house, while visions appear and vanilla ice cream oozes from the walls, and he is broken down by it over time. It's much less of a fall to madness and more of an exposure of his true nature. And then a fall to madness. So if psychological horror, bloody violence, flawed characters, and an unfolding story that becomes more clear over time are all your thing, it's a perfectly good horror film. Certainly not the worst I've seen on a streaming service. Where I felt the film was weaker were in areas of delivery. The acting was great, and Dawn and Liz are particularly good characters, especially by horror movie standards. If you want your horror film to make an impact, good characters are a must and are sadly often overlooked. But if you've ever seen Cabin in the Woods, you'll know a harbinger when you see one, and this one is a little rough to sit through. The ending slogged for me, not just because of a complete shift in main character perspective, but more so due to some pretty confused pacing. But don't take my word for it. If you haven't watched the movie and it sounds like something you're into, I enjoyed it and I spent a long enough time thinking about it that I wanted to rewatch it and make this video. Given that for more than half of the horror movies on my watched list, I had to stop and actively try to remember what they were even about, this one automatically earns some points for Netflix horror. That's all I can say without actually spoiling the thing, and I do plan on retelling the whole story, so here's your warning, spoilers ahead. Pause the video and watch the movie if you want, or mute the video and just enjoy the crochet thing slowly taking form before your looky holes. Now, let's talk about the movie. We open on a really effective crawl through the house, presented almost like a slideshow. On my second watch, I noticed the hints that you get to the house's sordid past. That it was, at one point, a bordello. You're even given a look at the dryer as spooky sounds amp up in a bit of cruel foreshadowing about what does inevitably happen to poor Cooper the dog. And yeah, I hate will they kill the dog tension, so there it is. They kill the dog. Just about every shot in this opening is a hint to something that happens later, and when the movie starts properly, Cooper and Dawn enter the house and we get to see how out of place a person as tall as Dawn, aka CM Punk, really is in a Victorian house. Side note, He was perfect, and he genuinely made this character the most unique thing about the movie. I don't really know what CM Punk does. I hadn't heard of him before this, but I thought he was great. Immediately, we see the most unsettling motif of the movie, the fact that the house tends to ooze. Don, being a horror protagonist, immediately shoves his hand into the oozing mold. Then the second motif comes in, the marbles that seem to come from nowhere, which Cooper promptly eats because he is the most realistic dog I've ever seen in a movie. Then we get an exposition dump in the form of Don's new neighbor. Plot twist, the home is actually right next to a church, and this woman is the pastor. Don tells her that he's got a pregnant wife, Liz, who is waiting for him to renovate the new house before she joins him. The pastor, whose name is Ellie according to Wikipedia, does the "I've seen many things" spiel, which basically makes me consider her complicit in the tragedy of this movie. I think if I were trying to warn my new neighbor that his house was a haunted bordello, I might say something more like, "And if you notice anything weird that you don't think people would believe, hey, I'm a pastor, I'm kind of here for that." But instead, she goes the route of "my door is always open," which translates more to a religious conversion sort of vibe, and Don isn't into it. We then see Don wake up in the home to a video call on his phone from Liz. Within the span of a few seconds, she's nagged him about a half dozen things, like that he's waking up too late and that she doesn't think he can handle the renovations himself. But the most telling part of this conversation is that she notices the beer bottle in his room, and his immediate reaction is to lie and tell her that it's some trash left over from the house. So we know right away that Liz is too good for him, as Don literally gaslights her, calls her paranoid, and Liz ends the call by assuring her husband that she trusts him. Don crash courses some DIY YouTube videos, puts on some bangin' heavy metal, and gets to work on the house. His power drill mysteriously stops working, so he plugs it into the same outlet that seems to currently be oozing Head & Shoulders anti-dandruff shampoo, and then gets a visit from his parole officer. Now we see why he wasn't supposed to be drinking alcohol. So Don walks into a bar. Cue another of my favorite parts of this movie, the bartender, who they set up like he's going to be another Harbinger, but then proves to be super woke, and he's amazing. Then he fulfills his duties in warning Don that straight men seem to suffer something in that house, which, looking back on it, makes me wonder if in the midst of the straight men who lived there and were eventually driven out, there may have been one or two lovely gay couples who made a comfortable home there and never knew what all the fuss was about. The next time we see Don in the house, we start seeing glimpses of ghosts. The next day, Don's fixing the pipes in the kitchen when they explode and spray blood at him, but that's just what old pipes do, apparently, so he goes to wash it off at the hose outside and meets totally not a ghost Sarah, whose flirting is about as subtle as an elephant trying to sneak a fart. We get a scene of Don jogging on a trail for the sole purpose of showing him look at another lady jogger's butt, but then he tries to take a shower in what is probably the worst case of character stands directly under the faucet before turning it on trope. Seriously, if your pipes were known to spray you with blood, why wouldn't you turn on the water before you got into the shower? But luckily for Don, the faucet only seems interested in slowly oozing what I can only assume to be Elmer's non-toxic white school glue. That is, of course, until he smacks it and suddenly gets blasted in the face by buckets of Silk brand non-dairy nut milk. Sarah shows up again that night and talks her way into the house. Sarah finally uses all of her feminine wiles and about 5 minutes of convincing him before Don finally gives in and cheats on his pregnant wife. Cooper, the wonderfully realistic dog, even barks at them while they're trying to get it on, giving Don a moment to rethink his choices and decide to remain faithful. Just kidding, he locks Cooper out of the room to bang Sarah, and we get a brief glimpse at ghost number 2 from Cooper's perspective as he barks in a dark-lit room. But just as Sarah leaves and Don is patting himself on the back for being an asshole, the roof of his bedroom collapses, revealing a voyeuristic set of bleachers which look down into the room, revealing to the characters that they're sleeping in what used to be a brothel where an audience could watch the girls work. Over the course of the next day, Liz nags at Don through the phone about the surprise addition to the home, and Sarah tries to talk her way back into the house, which Don this time refuses, probably to keep her at a distance now lest she become inconvenient to him later. But this doesn't stop horny ghost Sarah from materializing in the night disguised as Liz to trick Don into sleeping with her again while he's half asleep. Don awakes to find a marble left on his chest. And then, in a moment that truly disturbs me way more than it should, He stares at a patch of wall, becoming completely lost in the alluring energy of the house, and pops the marble into his mouth, swallowing it. This detail killed me. It's such a small action that's so disturbing in so many ways, not the least of which being that I was at one point the kind of child who might also have been tempted to eat a marble. So seeing this completely possible compulsion happen to an adult man on screen was really chilling. Friend and helpful construction partner Milo shows up, and Don snaps out of his brief trance without seeming to realize it had ever happened. They get the ceiling repaired and go out for a drink at the wokest joint in town with my favorite side character. The next morning, Don wakes up to Milo already working on the house and Sarah having slipped into the house yet again. Milo, being a genuinely good dude, knows what's up immediately by Don's reaction and confronts him about his cheating before Don storms out. And being a good dude in a horror film, Milo is promptly then placed on the chopping block. It's brutal, slow, and truly unsettling. As Sarah kills Milo, we also get a shot of ghost number 2 in pure daylight. She's clearly the more monstrous and grotesque type of spirit, with a barely mangled face left on her head. But she also acts like a little girl despite having the body of an adult woman. Milo's body is gone before Don returns home. Ellie shows up again and grinds the pacing to a halt, basically to say, hey, this is Act 2 of the movie. But all she does is spell out for Don that the house is testing him. And I get that a pastor might want to let someone face their own demons and trust in their strength to overcome them, but let me remind you that a man has actually died at this point, and he was just collateral damage. Poor Cooper pays that price next, and I hate this scene, so I skipped through it on my rewatch. Call me a wuss, but I don't always vibe with horror that seems too realistic. And as someone whose own cat once took a very brief spin in a tumble dryer, she was completely fine and uninjured, by the way. This scene wasn't something I wanted to relive. Don tries to tell the police that a woman has murdered his dog, and the police do the thing where they say, oh, but no forced entry, therefore no crime, and just leave. The cop does call him by his old Chicago tag, King Don, so maybe this guy had a vendetta against Don or something. Whatever's going on, it's a crappy scene. The walls ooze runny mayonnaise again, and more magic marbles mosey their way to Don just before Sarah appears before him again. This time, Don tries to apologize, but Sarah points out that he's just covering his own ass. All this culminates in Don finally crossing an unspeakable threshold and attempting to silence Sarah by means of mallet. He then covers her body in lye because he's definitely researched this premeditated murder and seals her body within the walls of the basement of his own house, where his baby daughter will one day grow up. Liz calls him mid-cover-up and says that Milo has been texting her, which we know is actually Sarah texting her with Milo's phone, which leads me to wonder how this 100-year-old ghost knows how to work a cell phone. Don hangs up on Liz and smashes a cupboard, then throws a piece of wood at the wall, and I genuinely wonder if this was like a mistake during filming because it bounces off the wall and back into his face, and he just keeps going, and it's great. Sarah's body is missing from Don's masterfully chosen hidey hole. We get the disembodied giggling of that monstrous spirit, and glimpses of various fluids are seen dripping throughout the house. The giggling leads Don to another hidden feature of the house, a walled-off room in the attic, the walls of which are adorned in childish drawings, and wherein he finds a bag of marbles. He gets the idea to run one of those small FBI snake camera things into the walls, maybe because he thinks Sarah is hiding in them or something, but instead gets a glimpse of a giggling ghost girl's ghoulish grimace. Fully driven mad by now, he tears into the walls of the house only to find that it bleeds and pulses with hair and fluids and occasionally barks like a dog. We see Milo's face within the wall, and even get a game of Whack-A-Ghost as the giggling face watches Dawn through the holes. She then appears, crawling out of a dresser, and it's a long, well-lit look into the visceral carnage that is her face. A marble shoots into Dawn's leg and rolls around beneath his skin while gleeful squealing echoes through the house. Don grabs a utility knife from his bag, desperately trying to carve the marble out from beneath his own skin and cutting his own jugular as he does. A final look at the ghost seals his fate as several marbles rush toward Don, and we cut away. Act 3 of this movie suddenly shifts perspective as Liz enters the house for the first time and becomes our new main character. Until this point, I liked this movie a lot, but what I just described to the best of my ability while you watch an adorable fuzzy crochet project come to life was what I had thought would be the climax of the movie. Dawn has failed the test of the house. We have seen the worst it has to offer, and now all that remains is the tying up of loose story threads. But that isn't what happens, because Act 3 is an entirely new arc for Liz. Liz, who, until this point, was little more than a point of frustration through Dawn's phone screen, a source of external pressure on him to resist his dark urges. But as Ellie is so poised to tell us, this house tests people, and perhaps it's telling that the first thing Liz does when she sees a relic of the bordello that the house used to be is that she immediately removes it from the wall with a stern, "Oh, absolutely not," and she's immediately suspicious of every weird thing the house is doing. She finds a crumpled newspaper from the bordello's heyday, which offers some exposition for Sarah, that she was murdered in the house and her body was never found. Liz meanders to the basement, which the movie has set up by now as being a kill zone for wayward characters. She meets Sarah, who might have been there to kill her, but their meeting was interrupted by yet another visit from plot device Ellie. Yet again, she's obviously telling the characters that she knows, explicitly, that the house is trying to kill them. Ellie is the worst. She is the actual worst. She is letting this pregnant woman be in a house she is so sure is evil, she wouldn't even set foot into it herself. Rewrite this movie, edit Ellie out of it, it would be missing nothing. Liz goes about her business. Freaky shit keeps happening, and we get a much quicker rise in tension from her being in the house, which seems like it's all about to pop off as Sarah appears in the background yet again. And Liz goes to chat with Ellie about Dawn. Again, she brings up that the house is a test. I really can't stress enough how hard of a crash it was to see all the crazy climactic stuff of the last hour finally pay off, only to then have to slog through this. Why are we talking about Dawn? Dawn's already dead. Time for characterizing Dawn is over. So does this characterize Liz? How? As someone who is too good for Dawn? We already knew that. Will she or won't she take him back? Who cares? He's dead at this point. So Ellie finally decides to tell Liz not to go back into the house. And Liz, like a badass or a dumb horror movie final girl, marches right back up to the front door, and we get exposition. Suddenly it's a flashback to when the house was a brothel, and Liz is a fish out of water as well as a pregnant woman out of patience. And I was 100% sure she was going to look down from the scaffolding into the bedroom and see Dawn putting on a show with female co-host Sarah, but it's actually way more disturbing, as some costumed plague doctor thing takes the stage instead, and it's some kind of creepy snuff thing, and you see the girl who becomes the second ghost in her room with the drawings being paid in marbles, presumably for sex, also with someone in a bird mask. So I was like, yeah, okay, this makes sense. These girls were mistreated at a bordello, they were probably murdered here, and now they haunt it. But I didn't get to make any sort of conclusions for myself because Sarah is suddenly fully clothed and talking to Liz in the modern-day house again, literally explaining the entire plot to her. Not just in a, hey, here's my story kind of way, but in a literal history lesson like she's reading a report on the house. She tells Liz that the little girl was murdered and her body dumped on some train tracks, probably explaining why her face is so mangled. She also explains that yes, she was also murdered and hidden in the house, which we already knew because Liz read it in a newspaper earlier, but yeah, alright, spell it out for us. You know what makes a movie really scary? When things are really clearly over-explained. And then she goes on this tirade about men only wanting women because they like having power over them. Which, I mean, go off, sis, I guess. If that's why you want to test people, because you say that no men came looking for you when you died. Except all the police officers we know looked for you because we read that newspaper headline, which got front page coverage, so your disappearance was questioned and you were looked for, but sure. Then she just whips out a utility knife and chases Liz with it, and this is like the worst thing. She's just banging on the door, laughing loudly while Liz holds it shut. Am I supposed to be afraid of the knife? I've already seen the worst thing the knife can do. Dawn got the worst of the knife. The knife is done. I've also seen Sarah magically project throughout the house, so closing a door stops her. But we see a glimmer of terror when the closet door creaks open, and we expect another good ghost girl scare. But this time, It's Dawn crawling across the floor, reminding us that 20 minutes ago this was a good movie. But in like half a second, he goes from crawling and groaning across the floor like a bloodied wreck to just sitting up and talking to her. The shift is so bizarre. Anyway, we see that all those marbles flew under his skin and he's been cutting them out of himself this whole time, but he didn't manage to get them all. Hint, hint, the marbles represent corruption, and Dawn was trying to start his life over by moving here, but he never made himself into a completely good person. Get it? Do you get it? But he's not a guy covered in slashes and bleeding to death in this scene. Here, he's serving as Liz's test. Sarah's test for Liz is whether she'll let Dawn continue to abuse their relationship and prey on her trust. And it seems pretty clear that Liz isn't having any of it anymore. Dawn screams that he can change, but Liz still isn't into it. And then the movie actually shits itself as Dawn goes on about changing, takes the utility knife to his forehead, and cuts his face off like a freaking Scooby-Doo villain, revealing Sarah's face underneath and laughing like a lunatic, which she was never set up as, by the way. Sarah was never set up as someone driven mad. She's just cackling like an insane person because this movie apparently needed this. She peels off her Dawn suit and again explicitly tells Liz that she was testing her. Liz screams and runs off. We get a completely fake scare about Liz falling over the banister, but she actually doesn't, and it was stupid, and Milo calls Liz's name from the wall and is also laughing like a lunatic, and it's also stupid, and then the walls spew melted brie cheese at Liz, and we get someone being birthed from the wall, like this is Ace Ventura crawling out of a fake rhinoceros, and oh, it's the little girl ghost. And Liz just beats the hell out of her with a sledgehammer. This girl whose backstory we just learned, this kind of sympathetic victim of a ghost. Yeah, Liz just straight up bludgeons her and she's done. And Sarah shows up, humming a song which has never come up in the movie, but other movies have women humming creepy songs, so screw it. Sarah can hum a song and coddle this dead pumpkin with teeth monster ghost spirit thing, and Liz escapes the house. And then, the moment she steps onto the front porch, who do we hear? Ellie. What does she say? You did good. What the hell? Ellie, you did good? And again, it's that weird pacing thing where Liz isn't like running for her life and getting away from the house. She just stops and talks to her. And she's like, why didn't you warn us? And Ellie's like, you made the choice. Like, what choice did Milo make? What choice did Liz make? She trusted her husband? She's got an unborn baby in that oven, Ellie. Were you just super chill to let unspeakable things happen to that? And it's pretty obvious because Ellie is saying it, so of course it's not subtle, that the house is some hell analog and the church across the street is obviously the heaven analog. But like, no. That's not how being a pastor works, just letting people stumble blindly into horrible suffering without trying to guide them in the right direction. Like, lady, that's literally your job, isn't it? And Liz is like, well, that's some load of crap. And Ellie just kind of dismisses her and drinks some scotch like a condescending asshole because Ellie sucks. Liz goes back into the house the next day, knows exactly where to look for the dead Sarah's body, buries it at the church, and I suppose that's the end of the curse. Except it isn't, because 6 months later, does it feel like this film is dragging on yet? Liz still lives in the house. The baby is born. The baby is in her crib, and from the ceiling vent, someone is dropping little green choking hazards, I mean marbles, into her crib, and you see Dawn's face through the vent, staring down at her. The end? Question mark? And it's over. I cannot express how frustrated I am by this movie because I enjoyed the first 2/3 of it so much. In fact, the ending was so bad that it actually poisoned my recollection of the movie. I just kept watching, thinking, how much longer does this go on? And seeing the pace ramp up and then faceplant again and again again. Suddenly it was like the tropes from half a dozen other movies just needed some sort of reference, and for 30 minutes it doesn't feel like the same movie. It was so hard to watch that I actually paused around the Ellie part the first time and forgot to go back and finish the last few minutes until it popped up on Netflix again the next time I turned it on. If you want to resolve your horror movie with a happy ending, awesome, fine. If you want a cliffhanger about it, also fine. But this ending felt so tacked on that nothing was going to make it feel organic again, which is a shame because I think the ending could have really solidified the reflective arcs of Liz and Dawn had things been done differently. Personally, I would have liked to see Liz introduced to the house much sooner. Maybe Dawn's arc can be about fixing up the house and falling prey to it, while Liz was more or less stuck in one room of it and figuring out about its history, all the while questioning her relationship with Dawn and whether she would continue to forgive him, while he's still alive, and not later, once he's dead. Maybe she finds the little ghost girl's bedroom, along with old photographs and a diary or something. Her journey with the house could have been a more natural way to include exposition without the movie having to spoon-feed it to us entirely at the end through really obnoxious monologuing. And as she finds each breadcrumb in the trail, we could have seen Dawn face what the repercussions of the past turned into in the modern day. If, like me, you see the marbles as a symbol for corruption, which is definitely a motif of the movie given the heaven and hell allegories, the marbles could have come in not only every time Dawn fell prey to something, but also when Liz found out something that turned the spirits of these poor girls into bloodthirsty ghosts. Then, when the marbles lead to Dawn killing himself, it would be a lot more clear that his choices led to his own demise. And Liz finding Sarah's body and laying it to rest, well, no, that was still a stupid thing to do because she had no reason whatsoever to think that moving that particular body was going to end all the haunting. I mean, the ghost girl's body was on a train track somewhere and she definitely still haunted them. And we never actually see her deal with Milo or Dawn's bodies. And on the topic of confusing things, there's that scene earlier when a ghost disguises itself as Liz to make Dawn have sex with it. Was this girl Sarah or the little girl ghost? Because it changes its face twice, then it leaves a marble behind. If this was Sarah, then the scene in the end where Sarah disguises herself as Dawn to trick Liz is actually a good callback. But I think turning that first ghost trying to sleep with Dawn into the pumpkin with teeth face for a scare ruined that bit of continuity for me. Unless I'm missing something and these ghosts just sort of meld together sometimes. There's my take on the movie anyway. It feels like they made a perfectly good movie all the way up to nearly ending it, then realized they didn't do a good enough job of establishing all the lore they wanted to convey. So in the end, they added an unnecessary shift in character so everything could be explained to Liz in a really awkward way that killed the pacing. Then they had to do a whole arc with Liz to make it seem worthwhile, but ultimately confused their own narrative by still connecting the strings in an unsatisfying way. Don't get me wrong, I like Liz. I think the main characters of this movie are probably the most interesting thing about it, but I'd have liked to see her arc happen alongside Dawn's fall to madness if we were going to compare them and watch them face the house in different ways. It took, over a week for Dawn to be slowly lulled into madness by the house? Liz gets the crash course, and suddenly Sarah might as well just be a crazy clown with a knife, and she faces the house with barely any doubt about what she's doing. And this is all so disappointing because on my second watch of the movie, I was reminded of just how good the little moments were, of how certain scenes stayed in my head and really made it a standout piece of horror on Netflix. But this was the director's first film, and honestly, I don't regret watching it. So I want to give the film credit where it deserves it, and if you hated the movie, maybe it deserves another shot. The Girl on the Third Floor. Come inside. I hope you enjoyed my summary and hot take of this Netflix horror movie. There are dozens of these things on streaming services, and I'm not going to stop watching them anytime soon. I realize my rantings are more of a commentary than an analysis, but horror is one of those genres where the meaning you find is always some sort of reflection of yourself. I have a lot of fun with these films, and if you had fun listening to me ramble about it, you can let me know by liking the video, or you can tell me your thoughts about the movie in the comments. Consider subscribing if you want to see more of the Stitch and Scream, or if you enjoyed working on your own projects while I gave the abridged version of a horror movie in the background. If you're here for the fuzzy stuff, again, follow the link to my Ravelry page in the description and see more fiber art. Until next time, stay safe and happy hooking.